It seems like a fantastic time to be a fan of the retro-styled FPS, doesn't it? They seem to just be coming out of the woodwork in droves. We've had the likes of Dusk and a Medieval, we've got Wrath to look forward to, but right here, right now, we have got Ion Fury. If the name is not familiar, that is because it was formerly known as Ion Maiden before the slightly overzealous lawyers of a heavy metal band, whose name should also be obvious, got involved. But thankfully, such legal shenanigans didn't really stand in the way of the release of the game itself. One swift name change later, and we are now able to step into the shoes of one Shelley Bombshell Harrison, a character who could be described as angry. Angry about what? Angry about cyborgs. Truth be told, I'd be pretty pissed off too if a bunch of homicidal cyborgs managed to interrupt my post-work drinking session, and it honestly serves as a wonderful, no-bullshit introduction to the game and the character herself, getting you right down to business and shooting those cyborgs squarely in the face. In the meantime, however, you would be forgiven entirely for taking a brief moment just to drink in the surroundings, because these are some wonderfully, richly detailed environments, things that induce a very strong sense of nostalgia, and me taking me back to the likes of Duke 3D and Shadow Warrior. And that, of course, is no coincidence whatsoever, because this is actually running thanks to the eDuke 32 source port, which adds more modern contrivances on top of the original build engine. But the one thing that I really associate with those classic build engine games is a genuine sense of detail, of grit, of grime to the levels and the environments that you travel through. There's always been that almost surface layer of scuzz to a build engine game like Duke 3D, Shadow Warrior, or even Blood, and thankfully that is no different here in Ion Fury. There's a refreshing cyberpunk grime to this futuristic city that you battle through in the initial few levels, and as you'd expect, these levels are also caked in an often quite comical layer of graffiti, posters, flickering neon signs, and most notably a giant banner in this particular area which proudly advertises the local sports team of the Washington Foreskins. Damn right I chuckled at that one. Always appreciate a good dick joke. If anything, I'd say that the level structure of Ion Fury is probably going to be the most awkward thing for me to attempt to describe, because this is not presented in your typical linear level format. Instead, what you get is an overarching environment, which is referred to as a zone, and within that you get multiple sub-levels. There's no hub situation here. You don't have a choice over which sub-level you tackle first, but it's all interconnected. Moving through one to the next will ultimately, in most cases, loop you back around to the beginning of the zone and finally grant you access to that locked door that tantalizingly blocks your path between this environment and the next. And the way it's all threaded together is just supremely impressive. In terms of the individual sub-levels that you'll be fighting your way through here, you'll find that, much like those classic build engine originals, they're constructed with a kind of Swiss cheese sensibility. And what I mean by that is that quite often you'll find that they're threaded through with routes of alternative access, be that a ventilation duct that you can use to flank an enemy position, maybe a crack in the wall you can blow open with a bowling bomb, or even an unexpected route opened up by an exploding fire extinguisher. All of this comes together to provide each of these levels with a tremendous sense of explorability, the kind of thing that practically begs you to stick your nose into as many dark corners as you possibly can. Inexorably, this will also lead you on the trail of many of Ion Fury's deeply buried secrets, and trust me, there are a lot of them. In fact, this game goes as far to tell you how many you've missed by the time you reach the end of a zone. So if you're an avid secret hunter, prepare to go insane tracking all of these down. On the flip side, however, I could quite easily see how the intricacies of the level design here within Ion Fury may leave some, let's say, less experienced players somewhat in the dust. Lord knows I found myself turned around on a frequent enough basis, but to those finding themselves scratching their heads, I've got two pieces of advice for you. One, remember the auto map, and two, if there's enemies in your way, that means you're headed in the right direction. Anyway, I've spent long enough warbling about the levels here. How about the combat? How does Ion Fury hold up that particular end of the bargain? Well, truth be told, I had a little bit of a rocky relationship with the combat here in Ion Fury, and that's largely down to a few misconceptions I had going in. Firstly, I was assuming this would be an experience closer to Duke 3D, which is my most played build engine game, whereas it actually has a fair amount of blood pumping through its veins. Coincidentally, a build engine game that I happen to be the absolute worst at. Couple that with my, quite frankly, harebrained decision to have my initial playthrough of this on Ultra Viscera difficulty, this game's equivalent of hard, and you've got yourself a recipe for anguish and frustration. To put it bluntly, Ion Fury does not fuck about on Ultra Viscera difficulty. It curb stomped me multiple times in the first level alone till I acclimatized myself to its pace of gameplay and combat, and I winced to think what the experience would be like on its hardest difficulty. Thankfully, the initial few zones here in Ion Fury have a regular rotation of fairly reliable enemy types. The first of which will be the Goon, the enemy type that probably reminds me the most of the Cultist from Blood. Very easy to dispatch, often found in ambush situations to maybe enhance its effectiveness behind doors, around corners, but once you know it's there, it's quite easy to deal with. The Shotgunner is a bit of a multi-purpose enemy type, visually distinctive from the rest, what with the riot gear and the white mask. It wields a disperser, which is the weapon I'm currently using right now, which features a frighteningly accurate primary shotgun fire and can then be transformed into a grenade launcher in its ult. The shotgun types can also use this ult, sometimes switches to it in mid to long range, and can be quite troublesome if you're dealing with a batch of them in a confined space, what with that grenade round bouncing all over the shop. The next enemy type is probably my least favorite of the batch, red-robed, crossbow-wielding douchebags. Not the official name for them, of course, just how I choose to remember them. They have quite possibly one of the most powerful weapons in the game, which isn't quite the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a crossbow, but this is a futuristic crossbow. There are differences. And what you should be really listening out for is that telltale charge noise before they let loose with a volley. That should be the warning for you to either get the hell out of the way of wherever they're going to be firing from, or kill them before they have a chance, because if they land a solid hit with one of those volleys, they can take a devastating chunk out of your health. In fact, I'd say that that particular enemy type was probably responsible for the largest number of my deaths during the initial few zones of Ion Fury, so yeah, douchebags. In any case, I had plenty of time to become acquainted with that particular roster of enemies because they seem to be the dominant presence for a fair significant chunk of the game, alongside obviously lesser enemies such as the spider skulls, the floating drone heads, and maybe the occasional smattering of floating cyborg missile platforms. But at one point I did actually become concerned whether it was ever going to introduce any new enemy types, but thankfully my fears were assuaged. That's a weird word, isn't it? Assuaged. I'm stuck on that word now. Fuck it. What was I trying to say? Oh yeah, new enemies eventually do turn up. That's what I was trying to say in my fancy book-learning kind of way. You get enemies such as this, which are quite frankly terrifying. They're a real interesting design. They remind me quite a lot of the Pinkies from Doom. They'll chase you around, they'll whack you about the face, and they can take a fair bit of punishment. So if you want to take them down quick, I would heartily recommend the crossbow, especially a charged crossbow shot. That apparently just melts them. Around about the same time, you will also have the pleasure of running into, where is he? This fella. He is profoundly spooky. He's a flaming head on a cyborg body. I'm not entirely sure what the deal is, but one thing I will always remember is Shelley's introductory line for this enemy.
This is the worst I've seen yet. This man has no dick.
But yeah, this guy takes a fair bit of killing and is particularly intimidating to have to deal with in claustrophobic indoor spaces such as this one. In fact, I'd say indoor spaces really do change up the dynamic of how you approach any given enemy here in Ion Fury. You certainly become a lot more wary of all those doors and corners, slowing down the pace somewhat as you try to avoid any potential ambushes or walking into a room full of just hot liquid death. Time to talk about boss battles. Turn away now if you don't want to have, well, every single one of them spoiled. Have they gone yet? Have they buggered off? Good. Anyway, I found the boss battles of Ion Fury to be a little bit of a mixed bag. The first one here against the War Mech is no doubt visually impressive. There's a lot of genuinely interesting stuff going on here. As you try to evade fire from the War Mech, it will launch mortars and will slowly but surely destroy every available bit of cover in the arena itself, forcing you to stay on the move and just generally keeping the pressure on for the duration. This is no doubt exacerbated by the lesser enemies that continuously chase you around the arena itself, be it the smaller spider heads or the crossbow wielders that you do not want to get caught by, and you've got a fairly kinetic battle on your hands. Where it kind of falls down on Ultra Viscera difficulty for yours truly was that by the 2/3 point getting down its life bar, I was just completely running out of ammunition. It's not like I spent the previous few levels just aiming my guns at walls and letting loose just to see what happened. I was just playing as usual. Maybe I didn't scout enough secrets, but I definitely felt like the ammunition was a little too much at a premium here. Now, there are resupplies that you can take advantage of in the arena, but you do have to blow up the crates with either one of your own bowling bombs, or you have to bait the War Mech itself into destroying them, which is just like inviting death, really. And I thought that staying a fair distance away from the War Mech would give me a little bit of a fighting chance, what with that autocannon seeming to be inaccurate at range. This didn't really matter much, as even glancing shots dealt quite a heavy amount of damage and just caused a heck of a lot of frustration in that final third of the battle in terms of just trying to bring it down. Eventually, the solution that I stumbled upon, which just felt really counterintuitive to me, was walking right up to its face with bowling bombs and using the inaccuracy of close range on that autocannon to stay alive while blowing it to smithereens. It's a solution that took me a frustratingly long time to stumble on, and yeah, it just ended up pissing me off. Next up is the Revenant Earthship, which is probably the true nemesis of this game, considering it was responsible for destroying part of your favorite watering hole at the start of the game. The only weapon you can really effectively use against this is the chain gun. Thankfully, there is a hefty ammo resupply here that never ever runs out. The only trick is finding it the first time, because it's a little subtle, a little too subtle. The beacon that's on top of it could stand to be a heck of a lot brighter, and the aim of this is to generally hit it squarely in the tailpipe, the big red glowing tailpipe. So it's a relatively simple and straightforward fight once you get the hang of it. I'd say that the only real snags getting in the way of this being an enjoyable little boss battle is the fact that it employs the same kind of lesser enemy harassment that was present in the previous boss battle, and here I don't really feel like it's strictly necessary. It just feels like it's an attempt to pad out the length of the boss battle itself. I'm fine with the crossbow guys. They can be dropped in, they're okay, especially because they get stuck on the balcony and it makes them easier to shoot. But the drones? Seriously, fuck those things. They're tiny, they're difficult to spot, they'll pepper you with the little annoying piddly laser things, and I just feel like the battle would be a heck of a lot more enjoyable without them. Next up is the Mega Brutalizer Twins, which I can't help but see as a reference to the Bruiser Brothers, and this is quite possibly one of the easiest fights that I experienced during the course of Ion Fury, which is curious considering it's at a much later part of the game. In fact, overall in Ion Fury, I felt that it got easier as it got along. From maybe, say, about the halfway point onwards, the difficulty that I had seemed to significantly let up, and I was left with one of two conclusions. Either I was getting better, or that these latter levels were somehow designed in a much more forgiving fashion. As for the fight itself, I've not really got much to say about it. It's straightforward, simple, to the point, just how I like it. You know exactly what you're doing, you're just making sure that you can keep a bit of distance between yourself and the twins, threading between them where possible, and ostensibly not blowing yourself up with your own bowling bombs or similar explosives. What I feel is a bit of a missed opportunity with this fight, however, is when you take out one of the twins, the other one doesn't go berserk. That's something that I've found to be a common thing in fights where you're dealing with two boss characters. You get one of them, the other one goes nuts in maybe a unique or interesting way, but that seems to have been overlooked here, which, yeah, is a bit of a shame. The final boss battle of Ion Fury is against the nefarious Dr. Heskel and his bitchin' Pterodome. Wonderful name. Shame about the fight, because it boils down to pure liquid bullshit. So the ultimate aim of this is to get up top on the Pterodome and chuck a bowling bomb or 10 down the very inviting hole in the top of it. Deal enough damage and the dome will react, pushing you back into the outer fringes of the arena and switch up a few aspects of it ready for the next phase. For example, adding a motive nukage between the laser gauntlet and the dome itself, not to mention adding a fresh wave of enemies for you to deal with. It's certainly an unconventional setup for a final boss, one that ultimately left me a little cold because I didn't really feel like I was fighting a boss, I just felt like I was fighting a location. Some kind of glorified horde stage that just got more irritating the longer I spent playing it. I don't know, it just seems to be a common thread of a lot of the boss battles that I enjoyed here. They start off alright, and then by the end of them you're just thoroughly fucking sick of them. Now don't get me wrong, I know how I sound here. It sounds like I'm whinging about a boss being too difficult, a boss having too much health. Oh jeez, what a world. But trust me, it just comes a point where you're like, are we done yet? This is past the point where the boss battle is exhilarating to play, where it feels like I'm overcoming something rather than cheesing it so I can just get on with my life. So, got a little bit negative there, but don't take that as the definitive statement on how I feel about Ion Fury. Remember, most of my vitriol there is aimed squarely at the boss battles themselves, and something that could be a whole different experience on one difficulty level down, so feel free to regard any of this with a pinch of salt. So let's talk about guns. Christ, it's only taken me over 16 minutes to get to this point. But hey, you can't say I didn't get there eventually. So, guns. What about them? I found them a little lackluster. Shock, horror, call the fucking police, Icarus has lost his mind, but bear with me here. The overall roster of weapons here in Ion Fury is no doubt effective. Each weapon does have a particular affinity when it comes to dealing with particular types of enemies. It's just that I wish they were a little bit more interesting. But before you lock me up in a straitjacket, you should know that my opinion when it comes to weaponry is severely compromised. I have played the wackiest, weirdest, and over-the-top mods conceivable when it comes to the subject of weaponry over the last few years, so my baseline is all over the friggin' shop when it comes to guns in video games. So what have we got in the roster here? We got the Loverboy handgun, we got the Disperser Riot shotgun, which pulls double duty as a grenade launcher, we got the Penetrator SMGs, we got the bowling bombs, the cluster pucks, and we've got the crossbow. I think the crossbow is functionally impressive. I mean, sure, it comprehensively shreds when you use the charged alt, and if you charge it longer, it turns into an absolute deletion beam, but the act of firing it is still kind of lackluster. It actually reminds me of a range of Nerf guns that they brought out specifically for girls. What was it called again? Oh yeah, Nerf Rebel. That's the one. I just feel like it could look chunkier, it could sound chunkier, feel chunkier. I think if I'm going to be honest, that right there is my holy trinity of satisfying gun design. I mean, there's a few guns in here that at least fulfill some of the criteria. The chain gun here is absolutely chunk. There is no denying that whatsoever. The shotgun is chunk, it's just that it doesn't sound chunk. It sounds like I'm lightly coughing on my enemies with the primary fire. That said, the Disperser turned out to be one of my most used weapons during the course of the Ion Fury campaign, if not for the simple fact that the primary fire is tremendously effective at range, going against that tired old cliche that you usually get with shotguns. Short range or bust? Certainly not here. I don't think there's any denying on my part that the Loverboy here is an interesting gun. I mean, it's an absolute monster of a revolver. It fires 3 bullets per trigger pull. It locks onto enemies with the alt, sometimes multiple if you've got enough bullets for it. It is the kind of ridiculous that I was hoping would be continued down the line. I was hoping that this was the baseline and things would just get sillier weapon-wise from here, but they're just too functional for me. What can I say? I've been spoiled, goddammit. But you know what? I will concede. There is plenty to enjoy in the roster of guns here. It's just that I'm crusty and old, and I haven't had my 5th monster can of the day, so I'm cranky. You know what I like? I like the fact that the penetrator SMGs can set my enemies on fire. That's pretty badass. It's just a shame I could never seem to find enough ammo to keep things aflame on a consistent basis. You know what else I thought was cool? Bowling bombs. You roll them, they lock onto enemies, they blow their shins off. Good shit. And then there's the clusterfuck. I nearly forgot about this one, if I'm going to be honest, because there's not really a massive supply of them during the course of the game, but they're essentially a trip mine that you can throw like a frisbee. Neat. So, would I recommend playing Ion Fury on Ultra Vista difficulty for your first playthrough? Absolutely not. Would I instead recommend a more reasonable difficulty, such as normal? Yes. Absolutely yes. Truth is, the things that make this game impressive really do outshine the things that frustrate, and I'm pretty sure when I get round to doing that normal difficulty playthrough, that quota of fun to frustration will balance out much more in favor of the fun. If I'm going to be honest, this game really is a commendable distillation of many of the aspects that made those classic build engine games great. And if you're jonesing for that particular style of throwback FPS, then Ion Fury is going to be very much up your alley. So yeah, give it a shot. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Anyway, time to wrap up this shit show of a video. Thank you very much for bearing with me for the duration. I have no idea what I'm doing. I spent 3 weeks off and I came back and I apparently forgot how to review a video game. With that regard, sincerest apologies to my wonderful patrons. There they go now, scrolling up the screen. Wonderful people. If you'd like to join this esteemed group, I offer multiple tiers, the lowest of which will grant you a spot in the credits. The next one up will grant you early access to videos before they're officially released. There is a tier above that one, but that's only for people who enjoy the smell of burning money. In any case, link in the description below. For the rest of you out there, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this video. I've also been reliably informed that begging for likes and subscribes actually seems to pay off these days, so if you want to see more garbage like this, then you know what to do. In any case, this has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.